"You're too emotionally attached," she mocked while texting her friend. So I detached completely. Now she scrolls through photos of the life she thought I'd never have without her. I never thought those words would come from someone I was planning to marry in 3 weeks, but there I was, standing in our Charleston apartment kitchen, watching Delilah's thumbs move across her phone screen while she delivered what felt like a death sentence to everything I thought we were building together. I owned a food truck catering business that I'd grown from nothing into something successful, working 16-hour days to build a life I thought we both wanted, and she worked as a freelance lifestyle blogger who seemed increasingly dissatisfied with the emotional connection I tried to maintain between us. The argument started when I asked about her late-night gym sessions that had become a nightly occurrence, not because I wanted to control her schedule, but because I missed spending evenings together like we used to when our relationship felt genuine and connected. I'd been working extra contracts to pay for our engagement party, coming home exhausted but still wanting to share my day with her, talk about our future, maybe watch a movie or cook dinner together like normal couples do. Instead, I found her getting ready to leave for another training session with Quentin, her personal trainer who seemed to require an unusual amount of after-hours consultation time and whose name appeared in her conversations with increasing frequency. When I mentioned that I felt like we barely saw each other anymore and suggested maybe we could spend one evening together without her rushing off to the gym, she looked up from her phone with this expression of pure annoyance, like I'd just asked her to sacrifice her firstborn child for my happiness. She told me I was being too emotionally attached, that my need for quality time together was suffocating her growth as an individual, and that I needed to develop some emotional independence instead of expecting her to be my primary source of connection and validation. The way she said it made me feel pathetic, like wanting to spend time with my fiancé was some kind of character defect that proved I was weak and needy rather than someone who valued genuine intimacy. What made it worse was watching her type messages throughout the entire conversation, her attention split between explaining my emotional deficiencies and whatever urgent communication required her immediate response. I caught glimpses of her screen when she turned it carelessly, seeing heart emojis and inside jokes that felt inappropriate for casual fitness discussions, but when I asked who she was texting, she said it was just Quentin helping her plan tomorrow's workout routine. The irony wasn't lost on me that she was lecturing me about emotional attachment while being unable to detach from her phone for 5 minutes to have a real conversation about our relationship. I started questioning everything I thought I knew about healthy relationships, wondering if my desire to connect emotionally with my partner was actually some kind of dysfunction that needed correcting. Maybe other successful couples maintained more distance, focused on individual growth rather than building something together, communicated through scheduling apps rather than meaningful conversations. Her words planted this seed of doubt that made me analyze every interaction we'd ever had, looking for evidence that I'd been too clingy, too invested, too emotionally available in ways that somehow damaged our dynamic. I began wondering if the emotional intimacy I'd always considered the foundation of love was actually the thing destroying it, and whether I needed to fundamentally change who I was to become the kind of partner she could actually respect and want to marry. That night, lying in bed listening to her text notifications ping constantly while she claimed to be setting her alarm for tomorrow's early training session, I realized I was about to marry someone who saw my emotional investment as a problem to be solved rather than a gift to be treasured. The woman I'd planned to spend my life with had just told me that caring about her was unhealthy, that wanting to spend time together was suffocating, and that my emotional attachment was preventing both of us from becoming the people we were supposed to be. I stared at the ceiling until dawn, wondering how I'd become so wrong about something that had always felt so right, and whether the emotional detachment she demanded was something I could actually learn to embrace. The truth about Delilah's manipulations started revealing itself through the most unexpected source. Her 3 closest friends who began reaching out to me individually as our engagement party planning intensified over the following weeks. Ivy, who'd known Delilah since childhood, was the first to approach me during a coffee meeting that was supposed to be about catering arrangements for the party, but quickly turned into something much more significant when she asked if I was really okay with how Delilah had been treating me lately. I told her everything was fine, that we were just working through some communication issues, but Ivy's expression told me she wasn't buying my diplomatic response, and she gently explained that Delilah had been characterizing me as suffocating and emotionally needy to everyone in their friend group. According to Ivy, Delilah had been complaining for months about my clingy behavior, describing our relationship dynamic as exhausting because I expected too much emotional availability from her, and she'd been portraying my concern about her late-night gym sessions as controlling and possessive rather than the natural worry of a partner who missed spending time together. What shocked me most was learning that Delilah had been simultaneously bragging about her fitness journey with Quentin, describing their training sessions in detail that went far beyond professional boundaries, talking about how he understood her goals and supported her growth in ways that I apparently couldn't comprehend. Ivy seemed genuinely uncomfortable sharing this information, but she felt I deserved to know that my fiancé had been systematically undermining my character while building up another man's importance in her life. Celeste, Delilah's college sorority sister, reached out the following week under the pretense of discussing party logistics, but her real agenda became clear when she started asking pointed questions about our financial arrangements and whether I felt like I was carrying an unfair burden in the relationship. She revealed that Delilah had been borrowing money from multiple friends to purchase expensive workout clothes and supplements, claiming that I was financially controlling and refused to support her health and fitness goals, which was completely untrue since I'd never questioned any of her purchases and had actually encouraged her gym membership. Celeste showed me receipts for loans totaling over $1,500 that Delilah had requested for various fitness-related expenses, always accompanied by stories about how I didn't understand her need for quality gear and proper nutrition to support her transformation. The most damaging revelation came from Piper, Delilah's colleague from her blogging network, who contacted me after seeing some concerning posts in their private social media groups where content creators shared strategies for growing their audiences and monetizing their personal lives. Piper explained that Delilah had been discussing our engagement as a content opportunity, planning to document our wedding journey for her blog while simultaneously keeping her romantic options open because she wasn't sure if marriage was the right choice for her brand development. She showed me screenshots of posts where Delilah had mocked my food truck business as just a food truck, dismissing my entrepreneurial success and calling me her stepping stone to something better, someone who provided stability while she figured out what she really wanted from life. Each conversation with these women revealed another layer of Delilah's deception, painting a picture of someone who had been living a completely different reality than the one she presented to me, someone who saw our relationship not as a partnership but as a temporary arrangement that served her immediate needs while she explored other possibilities. What struck me most was how genuinely concerned these women seemed about my well-being, how they'd each independently decided that I deserved to know the truth about what Delilah was saying behind my back, and how they'd all expressed admiration for my dedication to building something meaningful with someone who was actively undermining those efforts. They painted a picture of a man who was being emotionally manipulated by someone who had convinced him that his normal relationship expectations were character flaws, and their collective testimony made me realize that everything I'd been questioning about myself was actually evidence of my emotional health rather than dysfunction. The most disturbing part was discovering that Delilah had been orchestrating this narrative for months, carefully crafting a version of our relationship where I was the problem that needed solving rather than a partner who deserved respect and honesty. She'd been telling these women that I was holding her back from personal growth, that my emotional needs were exhausting her creativity and preventing her from reaching her full potential as both a blogger and an individual. According to their accounts, she'd been positioning herself as someone trapped in a relationship with a man who didn't understand her ambitions, who wanted to keep her small and dependent rather than supporting her journey toward independence and success. What made it even more manipulative was how she'd been using my genuine care and concern as evidence of my supposed dysfunction, twisting my normal partner behavior into symptoms of unhealthy attachment that proved I wasn't ready for the kind of mature relationship she needed. She'd been gathering ammunition for months, collecting examples of my emotional investment to use against me when the time came to justify whatever exit strategy she was planning, and her friends' revelations made it clear that she'd been preparing to leave me long before she started her fitness journey with Quentin. Armed with this new understanding of Delilah's manipulation tactics, I decided to take her advice about emotional detachment to its logical conclusion, implementing a complete withdrawal from the emotional labor I'd been providing while carefully documenting her contradictory responses to my changed behavior. I stopped initiating our morning conversations about daily plans, stopped asking about her feelings or her day, stopped expressing concern about her activities or whereabouts, and responded to her communications with neutral acknowledgments that provided information without emotional investment or personal connection. When she told me about her workout plans, I said okay instead of asking follow-up questions about her training progress, and when she shared frustrations about her blog or work situations, I offered practical solutions rather than emotional support or empathetic responses. Initially, Delilah celebrated this transformation as evidence of my emotional growth and maturity, posting on her social media about how proud she was to see her partner developing independence and learning to give her the space she needed to flourish as an individual. She wrote blog posts about helping your partner overcome emotional dependency, positioning herself as someone who had successfully guided a clingy boyfriend toward healthier relationship dynamics through patience and clear communication about boundaries. Her content during this period painted me as someone who had finally learned to respect her autonomy and support her personal development without smothering her with unnecessary emotional demands or expectations. However, her satisfaction with my emotional detachment lasted exactly until she realized I wasn't reacting to her increasingly obvious attempts to provoke jealousy through her social media presence and her stories about Quentin. She started posting workout photos with captions about how amazing it felt to train with someone who truly understood her goals, sharing quotes about finding people who inspire you to become your best self, and dropping Quentin's name into conversations with the kind of casual frequency that was clearly designed to gauge my reaction. When I responded with the same neutral acknowledgement I'd give to any information she shared, she became visibly frustrated that her emotional manipulation tactics were no longer producing the desired results. The shift in our dynamic had an unexpected side effect that I hadn't anticipated. Her friends started reaching out to me more frequently, drawn to the calm confidence and genuine interest I was able to show in their lives when I wasn't constantly managing drama and emotional crises with Delilah. Ivy invited me to coffee to discuss business opportunities for my catering company. Celeste asked for my advice about her own relationship challenges, and Piper suggested I join their weekly trivia group since Delilah had been declining their invitations to focus on her fitness schedule. These women seemed to appreciate conversations that weren't dominated by Delilah's emotional needs or her constant analysis of relationship dynamics, and I found myself enjoying social interactions that felt reciprocal and genuine rather than one-sided emotional labor. What became increasingly clear was that my emotional detachment had revealed the true foundation of our relationship dynamic, which was essentially me providing constant validation, concern, and emotional support while receiving criticism about my attachment style in return. Without my emotional investment driving our interactions, there was very little substance left between us, just scheduling discussions and practical arrangements that felt more like roommate negotiations than romantic partnership. Delilah seemed genuinely confused by this change, occasionally asking if I was angry or if something was wrong, but when I explained that I was simply following her guidance about developing emotional independence, she couldn't articulate what exactly she wanted me to do differently without contradicting her previous complaints about my behavior. The irony wasn't lost on me that the woman who had spent months criticizing my emotional attachment was now struggling with my emotional absence, trying to recreate the very dynamic she had labeled as unhealthy and suffocating. She wanted me to care about her activities with Quentin without being clingy, to show interest in her daily experiences without being needy, to provide emotional support without being attached, essentially demanding that I maintain the impossible balance of being emotionally available when convenient for her while remaining detached enough not to interfere with her other pursuits. This realization crystallized something important for me. Her complaints about my emotional attachment had never been about helping me develop healthier relationship skills, but about creating a framework where she could justify receiving emotional support while withholding it, where she could maintain connection when it served her needs while having permission to withdraw when it didn't. As my friendships with Ivy, Celeste, and Piper deepened over the following weeks, they began sharing information that revealed the full scope of Delilah's manipulation tactics spanning our entire 2-year relationship, painting a picture of systematic emotional abuse that I had been too close to recognize while living inside it. Ivy was the first to explain how Delilah had been deliberately isolating me from my own social circle by creating conflicts and drama whenever I made plans that didn't include her, scheduling her own crises and emergencies to coincide with my commitments to friends, and then criticizing me for choosing other people over her when I tried to maintain those relationships. She'd been systematically poisoning my connections to anyone who might provide perspective on our dynamic, ensuring that I remained dependent on her version of reality without outside input that might contradict her narrative about my emotional dysfunction. Celeste revealed the financial manipulation that had been happening behind the scenes, showing me bank statements and credit card records that demonstrated how Delilah had been accumulating significant debt while expecting me to cover an increasing percentage of our shared expenses under the guise of supporting her business growth and personal development. The fitness equipment, supplements, and training sessions with Quentin were just the tip of the iceberg. She'd also been spending money on courses, coaching programs, and networking events that she claimed were essential investments in her blogging career, all while positioning my questions about our budget as evidence of my controlling nature and lack of support for her ambitions. What shocked me most was discovering that she'd been using credit cards I didn't know existed to fund lifestyle purchases that maintained her social media image, racking up thousands of dollars in debt that she planned to reveal after our marriage when it would become my legal responsibility. Piper's evidence was perhaps the most damaging because it included screenshots and documents that proved Delilah's exit strategy had been in development for months before she'd ever mentioned feeling suffocated or emotionally overwhelmed by our relationship. She'd been maintaining an active dating profile on multiple platforms, describing herself as someone exploring her options and figuring out what she really wanted from life, using photos from our vacations and dates while claiming to be single and available for new connections. The job applications Piper showed me were all in different cities, primarily locations where she'd identified potential romantic prospects or business opportunities that aligned with her lifestyle brand, and her conversations in blogger networking groups revealed detailed plans for leveraging a broken engagement as content that would generate sympathy and followers. What made these revelations even more painful was learning how these three women had watched Delilah systematically diminish my character and contributions while building up other men who showed interest in her, particularly Quentin, but also several online connections she'd been cultivating through her social media presence. According to their accounts, she'd been describing me as someone who was holding her back professionally, whose small-town food truck business represented everything she was trying to move beyond, whose emotional needs interfered with her ability to network and grow her personal brand. She'd been positioning our relationship as a learning experience that had taught her what she didn't want in a long-term partner, someone stable enough to provide security while she figured out her real goals but not ambitious or exciting enough to deserve her permanent commitment. Each woman expressed genuine admiration for qualities in me that Delilah had been systematically undermining and criticizing, particularly my dedication to building something meaningful with my catering business and my authentic interest in other people's lives and experiences. Ivy praised my work ethic and entrepreneurial vision, noting that my food truck had grown into a successful operation that employed several people and served major events throughout Charleston, achievements that Delilah had been downplaying as small-scale local business rather than celebrating as evidence of my drive and capabilities. Celeste appreciated my emotional intelligence and communication skills, mentioning how refreshing it was to have conversations that weren't dominated by drama or manipulation, and how my genuine curiosity about other people's perspectives made social interactions feel meaningful rather than transactional. Piper was particularly insightful about the psychological dynamics she'd observed, explaining that Delilah's need to diminish my accomplishments and emotional health was actually evidence of her own insecurity about our relationship and her prospects outside of it. She pointed out that healthy, confident people don't need to tear down their partners to feel good about themselves, and that Delilah's constant criticism of my attachment style was projection of her own inability to form genuine emotional connections with anyone, including the friends she claimed to value so highly. According to Piper's analysis, Delilah was using me as emotional regulation while simultaneously resenting me for providing stability she couldn't create for herself, creating a dynamic where she needed what I offered but hated herself for needing it. The most important thing these conversations revealed was that my emotional investment in our relationship hadn't been unhealthy attachment but normal partner behavior that Delilah had weaponized to maintain control over our dynamic and justify her exploration of other options. They helped me understand that wanting to spend quality time with my fiancée, caring about her daily experiences, and expressing concern about changes in our relationship weren't signs of dysfunction but evidence of my capacity for genuine intimacy that many people would treasure rather than criticize. Their collective perspective showed me that I'd been gaslighted into believing my emotional health was the problem when the real issue was being in a relationship with someone who saw vulnerability and care as weaknesses to be exploited rather than gifts to be reciprocated. Delilah's carefully constructed fantasy relationship with Quentin imploded in the most spectacular way possible when his girlfriend Monique discovered their affair through the fitness tracking apps they'd all been using to document their workout progress and the increasingly intimate workout videos Delilah had been posting to her social media accounts. Monique, who worked as a physical therapist and understood the professional boundaries that should exist between trainers and clients, had been noticing irregularities in Quentin's schedule and the unusual amount of after-hours communication he'd been having with one particular client whose name appeared constantly in his conversations and whose workout sessions seemed to require extensive follow-up discussions and personalized attention that went far beyond normal training protocols. The confrontation happened at the gym during what was supposed to be one of Delilah's regular evening sessions with Quentin, but Monique arrived unexpectedly to find them in a compromising situation that made it impossible to maintain the fiction that their relationship was purely professional. According to the gym gossip network that reached me through mutual acquaintances, Monique had been tracking Quentin's location through their shared fitness apps and discovered that his training sessions with Delilah were lasting significantly longer than scheduled and often took place in locations that weren't the gym's main workout areas, including private consultation rooms and even Quentin's apartment when the gym was closed for equipment maintenance. Quentin immediately chose to save his own relationship over whatever he'd been building with Delilah, cutting off all contact with her without explanation and blocking her on every platform they'd been using to communicate, including the fitness apps where they'd been sharing workout data and the private social media accounts where Delilah had been posting content that subtly featured their training sessions together. His decision to prioritize Monique left Delilah completely blindsided, especially since she'd been using their connection as evidence of her desirability and proof that she had options beyond our relationship, and his sudden withdrawal forced her to confront the reality that she'd been disposable to him in ways she hadn't anticipated. The aftermath of Quentin's rejection sent Delilah into a social media spiral that was both painful and revealing to watch unfold, as she posted increasingly desperate content about fake people who use others for their own gratification and users who take advantage of genuine connections before disappearing without explanation. Her carefully curated lifestyle brand began cracking under the pressure of her emotional breakdown, with posts that swung wildly between bitter inspirational quotes about recognizing your worth and thinly veiled attacks on people who don't appreciate authenticity when they encounter it, all while maintaining the fiction that her life was proceeding exactly as planned. Meanwhile, my emotional detachment had created space for me to focus entirely on expanding my catering business, which had been thriving despite Delilah's constant dismissal of its potential for growth and success. I landed 3 major contracts during the weeks of her Quentin crisis, including a monthly arrangement with a tech company that valued my reliable service and creative menu development, a wedding season package with a high-end venue that had been impressed by my professionalism and attention to detail, and a partnership with a local brewery that wanted to offer food service during their events and tastings. These opportunities had always been available, but my emotional energy had been so consumed by managing Delilah's needs and insecurities that I hadn't been able to pursue them with the focus and dedication they deserved. The contrast between Delilah's public meltdown and my steady professional advancement became increasingly visible to our entire social circle, particularly her friends who had front-row seats to both dramas unfolding simultaneously. While she was posting cryptic messages about betrayal and disappointment, I was sharing updates about business milestones and new partnerships, and while she was spiraling over Quentin's rejection, I was building relationships with clients who valued reliability and quality over drama and manipulation. Her friends began openly commenting on the difference between someone who built their life on genuine effort versus someone who relied on other people's emotional investment to maintain their lifestyle and self-image. What struck me most during this period was how much mental and emotional energy I'd been unconsciously dedicating to managing Delilah's moods, anticipating her reactions, and trying to provide the kind of support that would prevent her from feeling insecure or dissatisfied with our relationship dynamic. Without that constant emotional labor consuming my attention, I was able to engage with my work and my goals with a clarity and focus that had been missing for months, maybe even years, and the results were immediately apparent in both my business success and my overall sense of personal satisfaction and accomplishment. Ivy, Celeste, and Piper each made comments about how different I seemed since implementing emotional detachment, noting that I appeared more confident, more decisive, and more genuinely engaged with conversations and activities that had nothing to do with relationship drama or crisis management. They pointed out that my business achievements during this period proved that Delilah's characterization of me as unmotivated and small-thinking had been projection of her own limitations rather than accurate assessment of my capabilities, and they expressed genuine excitement about supporting my catering expansion in ways that felt authentic rather than obligatory. 2 days before our scheduled engagement party, Delilah finally confronted me about what she described as my cold and distant behavior, demanding that I return to being the emotionally available partner she claimed to have helped me become through her guidance and patience over the past few weeks of my transformation. The conversation took place in our apartment kitchen, the same location where she'd originally criticized my emotional attachment, but this time her energy was completely different, desperate rather than condescending, pleading rather than lecturing as she tried to understand why I wasn't providing the emotional support and validation she'd grown accustomed to receiving from me throughout our relationship. She broke down completely when I calmly explained that I was simply following her advice about emotional detachment and developing independence, pointing out the obvious hypocrisy in her current request for me to return to the very behaviors she had previously mocked and criticized as evidence of my dysfunction and immaturity. I reminded her of her exact words about being too emotionally attached, about needing to develop independence, about her feeling suffocated by my care and concern, and I asked her to explain what had changed that made those same behaviors suddenly desirable rather than problematic for our relationship dynamic. Her attempt to gaslight me into believing I had misunderstood her previous complaints failed spectacularly when Ivy, Celeste, and Piper arrived at our apartment under the pretense of collecting items they'd lent her for the engagement party, but their real purpose became clear when they effectively staged an intervention about her treatment of me over the past several months. They'd coordinated their arrival to coincide with our conversation, and their presence forced Delilah to confront the reality that her manipulation tactics were no longer working because the people closest to her had witnessed her behavior and were choosing to support me instead of enabling her emotional abuse. The confrontation that followed revealed the full scope of Delilah's exit strategy, including her detailed plans to use our engagement announcement as content for her blog growth and social media expansion, her intention to break up with me after maximizing the publicity value of our relationship milestone, and her backup plans with various men she'd been cultivating as potential replacements, including but not limited to Quentin, who had already rejected her advances and moved on with his actual girlfriend. Ivy presented evidence of Delilah's financial deception, Celeste shared screenshots of her dating profiles and job applications in other cities, and Piper revealed the private conversations where Delilah had been planning to leverage our breakup as content about recognizing your worth and leaving relationships that don't serve your growth. Delilah's response to being exposed was to accuse me of turning her friends against her, unable to comprehend that they were responding to my genuine character and her manipulative behavior rather than some conspiracy I'd orchestrated to undermine her social connections. She claimed that I'd been manipulating them with the same emotional tactics I'd used on her, projecting her own manipulation strategies onto my straightforward interactions with people who appreciated honesty and reciprocity in their relationships. Her inability to understand that authentic connection doesn't require manipulation or emotional labor revealed how fundamentally different our approaches to relationships had always been. When she realized that her usual tactics weren't working and that her friends were solidly supporting my perspective over hers, Delilah shifted to threats and ultimatums, declaring that I would regret losing someone like her and that I'd never find another woman willing to put up with my emotional neediness and small-scale ambitions. She threatened to tell everyone about my supposed dysfunction and controlling behavior, apparently forgetting that her own friends had just presented evidence of her manipulation and deception that contradicted every accusation she was making against me. I maintained complete emotional neutrality throughout this confrontation, responding to her escalating dramatics with the same calm detachment she'd originally demanded, and I could see how much my refusal to engage emotionally was frustrating her attempts to regain control over the situation. When she finally exhausted her repertoire of manipulation tactics, I calmly canceled our engagement party, returned her belongings to the boxes her friends had brought for that purpose, and informed her that she had until the end of the week to make arrangements for moving out of the apartment we'd shared. The most satisfying moment came when Delilah tried one final manipulation by claiming she'd learned to value emotional connection and wanted to prove she'd changed, but I simply pointed out that her timing was suspiciously convenient given that Quentin had rejected her and her exit strategy had been exposed by her own friends. I explained that I was no longer interested in being someone's backup plan or emotional safety net, and that I'd learned to value myself enough to refuse relationships where my care and investment were treated as problems to be solved rather than gifts to be treasured. 1 year later, my life had transformed in ways that exceeded every goal I'd imagined possible during the darkest moments of my relationship with Delilah, proving that emotional detachment had given me the clarity and focus necessary to build something genuinely meaningful rather than just maintaining someone else's fantasy lifestyle. My catering business had expanded into a full restaurant after I'd been able to dedicate my complete attention to professional growth and authentic relationships with clients who valued quality and reliability over drama and manipulation, and the success felt even sweeter because it was built on my own merit rather than emotional labor extracted from others. The restaurant, located in downtown Charleston with a focus on locally sourced ingredients and creative takes on Southern cuisine, had become profitable within 6 months and was already being featured in regional food publications that praised both the innovative menu and the genuine hospitality that reflected my commitment to making people feel valued and cared for in healthy ways. My emotional detachment from Delilah had allowed me to channel that same energy into creating experiences that brought joy to customers without requiring them to manage my feelings or validate my worth. And the difference in how people responded to authentic care versus manipulative neediness was stark and encouraging. More importantly, I was in a committed relationship with Celeste that was built on mutual respect and emotional honesty rather than the manipulation and control dynamics that had characterized my time with Delilah, and every day reinforced how much healthier it felt to be with someone who treasured my emotional investment rather than weaponizing it against me. Celeste appreciated my thoughtful approach to planning dates and remembering details about her life. She supported my business goals without trying to diminish my achievements, and she contributed her own emotional energy to our relationship rather than treating me as a resource to be depleted when convenient. Our relationship had developed naturally from the friendship we'd built during Delilah's manipulation campaign, and Celeste often mentioned how attractive she found my ability to maintain boundaries and emotional stability even under pressure, qualities that had emerged more clearly once I'd stopped pouring my energy into someone who saw vulnerability as weakness rather than strength. She'd been present for my growth throughout the entire process of recognizing and recovering from emotional manipulation, and her perspective on relationships was informed by witnessing both my capacity for genuine connection and my refusal to accept treatment that didn't match my investment. Ivy and Piper remained close friends who regularly supported my restaurant and celebrated my achievements, forming a genuine social network based on shared values and mutual respect rather than the drama and crisis management that had characterized social interactions when Delilah was orchestrating conflicts to maintain control over my attention and energy. These friendships had flourished once they were no longer filtered through someone who saw other people's happiness as competition for resources, and I discovered how much more fulfilling social connections could be when they weren't constantly undermined by someone who needed to be the center of attention at all times. Meanwhile, Delilah continued attempting contact through intermediaries and social media platforms, claiming she'd learned to value emotional connection and wanted to prove she'd changed enough to deserve another chance at building something real together, but I maintained my detachment policy and refused to engage with manipulation tactics that I now recognized immediately. Her lifestyle blog had failed completely after losing credibility when her engagement announcement was followed by obvious relationship drama. Her social media following had dwindled to people who enjoyed watching train wreck content rather than genuinely supporting her growth, and her attempts to rebuild her personal brand were hampered by her inability to take responsibility for her own choices and behavior patterns. The most telling aspect of her continued attempts at contact was how she frequently posted nostalgic content about the one who got away, inadvertently promoting my restaurant's success to her remaining followers while demonstrating the exact emotional attachment she'd once mocked as unhealthy and suffocating. Her posts about recognizing true love too late and appreciating emotional connection only after losing it revealed that she'd finally learned to value the very qualities she'd spent months criticizing. But her timing proved that her regret was motivated by my success rather than genuine understanding of what healthy relationships required from both partners. I'd learned that the greatest victory wasn't hatred or revenge, but the peace that came from building a life with people who appreciated authenticity and emotional health rather than trying to exploit those qualities for their own benefit. And every day of genuine happiness with Celeste and our shared social circle reinforced how right I'd been to refuse settling for someone who saw my care as a character defect rather than a gift worth treasuring.